Hey everyone, it's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted to have my close buddy, lifetime friend here, Glenn Loury, back. He's been on Economics Matters, the podcast, many times, and I've been on the Glenn Show, his podcast, many times. And Glenn's a fantastic economist, and I don't say that lightly. He's done seminal work on economics of racism, on economics of patent. His original thesis was fantastic about economics of the transmission of inequality across generations, intergenerational inequality transmission. That's where I met the great Glenn Loury first, reading his seminal paper on that. And actually, I was so in awe of that paper and of Glenn that I was actually intimidated about even contacting him. And at some point, I decided when I was chairman at BU that we needed to have him at BU, and we hired him away from Harvard, and he stayed with us. And I think did some of his very best work at BU. And within 2 years, he wrote like 4 or 5 top journal articles, which is almost unheard of. I've never heard of anybody with that kind of a track record, period of productivity. And these are articles about the economics of racism that, together with co-authors Steve Code in particular, who's at LLC, I guess, right? So, or maybe he's at Cornell.
It's at Cornell. Tim Besley was a co-author on another paper, a separate paper.
Yeah.
On rotating savings and credit associations. That he's at LSE.
LSE, yeah. Both Brits, both great guys. And this is people are nominating Glenn for the Nobel Prize for this work. I know that for a fact. I can't say who might that be, but so I think this is Nobel Prize winning work. We'll see what happens. A lot of people are candidates, but it's that good. But there's a whole other side of Glenn. And just to give you a little, if you're new to Glenn, he's got a very interesting, tough background in many ways. Grew up, and he has a autobiography called, what's the name of the book? The autobiography?
It's called Late Admissions: Confessions of a Black Conservative.
Okay, just repeat the first.
Late Admissions.
Late admissions. Okay, so the pun on admissions for universities or colleges, but late admissions, confessions of a Black conservative. And this really lays out exactly Glenn's transition path. And it was not easy or smooth. And Glenn had lots of, like all of us, have anxieties about how good he was. But part of our brains want to try and keep us from actually just doing our thing. And when Glenn just did his thing, beautiful things came back out. But there was a lot of pain and anxiety along the way in that path, and doubt, self-doubt. That's true for me too. But anyway, Glenn got into Northwestern for college, or Northwestern. Then he went to MIT, got a PhD, did fantastically well there. Then he got a job at Michigan as an assistant professor, and then he was hired away by Northwestern. Then he was hired away to Harvard as a professor.
It's the other way around. I was an assistant at Northwestern, and I got hired away by Michigan.
And then you got hired away by Harvard, and then you got hired away by Boston University, and then you got hired away years later by Brown University. So he's been at Brown for many years. He's now an emeritus professor at Brown, and again, one of our country's top economists. But he's also started this many years ago now, maybe 8 years ago, you started doing podcasts?
I've been doing the podcast since 2007, 19 years.
19 years.
Almost 18 and a half years.
Yeah, and I thought it would be cool to talk about this separate kind of second career, parallel career that Glenn has been embarked on, which is talking to the public about economics, but also social issues and politics and geopolitics, and just giving, when we grew up, we had Bill Buckley and Gore Vidal, and we had these great public intellectuals who really were knowledgeable, but they weren't economists. And Glenn is the first true economist, public intellectual in this. And I refer to that in the form of, with reference to speaking to the public about pretty much any issue of the day. And so starting 19 years ago, Glenn started talking about racism and issues of that, but other issues as well. And I thought it would be good to talk not about all 19 year, whatever, how many years this is, 19 years of podcasts, because it's too many. There's probably thousands of podcasts at this point, right? You've done quite a few.
Yeah, I've done a few.
Quite a few. So, and you've interviewed all kinds of very interesting people, or they've interviewed at the same time he's being interviewed by a who's who of top person of podcasters and TV personalities and been on all kinds of media, the highest level. But let's talk to give people a feel for this second career and for the Glenn Show, which is the name of your podcast, about some of the recent podcasts, but maybe, for example, the truth about George Floyd's death. That's one that's had a lot of hits. Filmmakers reveal the truth about his death. This Could End Diversity Training is the name of one of the recent podcasts. Glenn versus Hitchens, the reparations debate. What to do about cognitive inequality. Black DEI director fired for white supremacy, for pushing white supremacy. Why wickedness is a scam. The end of Ibram X. Kendi. Tucker Carlson and the Dysfunction of Black America. These are titles that podcasts have gotten lots of attention. They're not just the most recent ones, but they're I would say, the biggest hits of late in terms of views. So I want, Glenn, you to talk to us about these, some of these podcasts, but tell us in general why you set this thing up and how you decided to do it the way you're doing it, and whether it's been successful and why you like to do it, and give us a history of the Glenn Show.
History of the Glenn Show.
A little bit, and then let's talk about the specifics here.
Okay, Larry. Well, first of all, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. You're a friend, and you may be somewhat overly generous in your assessments, but I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah, I've been doing it so long, it's become almost second nature, and I owe a big debt of gratitude to Robert Wright, Bob Wright of the Non-Zero Foundation, of the book Non-Zero, Why Buddhism is True is another one of his books. He's a journalist. I knew him when we both of us were young, around the New Republic. He was on when Martin Peretz owned, and Leon Wieseltier was one of the senior editors, and the New Republic was in its heyday back in the 80s and 90s. And Bob was on the editorial staff there. In long story short, he started a platform called Blogging Heads, back in 2007. And it was before contemporary technology for social media. Guys and girls, but mostly guys, would call each other on the telephone and talk about an issue with their cameras running, recording their side of the telephone conversation with audio and video, and then submit it to a webmaster who would conjure it up so that it would appear that they were face to face in conversation with one another. And this was Bob's idea, Bob's sort of cutting edge idea about how to extend blogging, which is writing commentary back and forth via text, into a video medium. He called it Blogging Heads. And a friend of mine, Josh Cohen, the philosopher, he was at MIT on the faculty there for many years, and then went out to Stanford, and then went on to be a senior faculty member at Apple University, which is where he is right now, teaching part-time at the Berkeley Law School. This is Josh Cohen. Josh and I are friends, and Josh is the editor-in-chief of the Boston Review, which is a literary and intellectual political magazine that's been published for some years. And I know this is taking a long time, Larry, but you invited me to describe how I came to be in the podcast business. Bob Wright invented Blogging Heads and invited me on to talk with Josh about my Tanner lectures. I had been invited in 2007 to give some lectures at Stanford to the ethics faculty out there, the so-called Tanner lectures. And I gave a pair of lectures on mass incarceration, critical of the racial disparity in incarceration incidents, and expounding on the policies surrounding incarceration and racial disparity in incarceration rates. And Josh heard this lecture and he wanted to talk to me about it. So long story short, he invited me on Bob's platform to do a Blogging Heads conversation in 2007 about my lectures on mass incarceration. I did. It was a huge hit. I was eloquent, passionate, articulate, and brilliant, they say. And Bob Wright said, man, you're really, really good at this. What's the this? The this is what we're doing right now. Spontaneous exposition on subject matter. Now, I'm an economist, as you have noted. That's my home base. But I'm also an intellectual. I read. This is something I've been doing all of my adult life. I owe my teachers at Northwestern University, where I was an undergraduate, not just my economics teachers, although they were quite good, but also my literature teachers, my philosophy teachers, my political theory teachers, in instilling in me a love of the great books, of following in the intellectual magazines like the London Review of Books and the New York Review of Books and so on, and engaging in ideas. And I'm also loquacious, pretty good at expressing myself, able to frame an argument on the fly, passionate in my exposition. Now, these are qualities that go well with the platform that Blogging Heads was developing in 2007. So Bob Wright invited me to have my own show. I did a couple of conversations with Josh Coyne, and he said, you're good. You want to join us and do this on a regular basis? What is this? This is call somebody up and say, hey, I saw your piece. I thought it was interesting. Want to talk about it for an hour? And they say, yes. And then, okay, we make a date. And back in the old days, I have my telephone, you have your telephone, we're connected on the telephone and we're talking, and we're recording each other's respective sides of the conversation, and we're submitting that to a webmaster who is massaging it into a talking head format where we have a split screen and it seems like we're right in the same room talking with one another. And I just started doing it. So I did want to check that box. I wanted to check the Bob Wright, originator of the idea for Blogging Heads, creating a platform where I got my start. The other piece that I want, a historical piece that I want to reference, is John McWhorter. John is my regular conversation partner at the Glenn Show. He used to appear twice a month, every other week. He now appears once a month because I've wanted to expand the range of conversation partners that I had. And John has many other things to do, and we've been doing it for a long time. But he and I started talking late in 2007, early in my tenure with Bob Wright's Blogging Heads platform. And he's Black, John McWhorter. He's a linguist. He's at Columbia. He's relatively heterodox. I'm not going to call him a conservative. That would upset him, as it would upset you if I were to call you a conservative. But as an economist on certain matters, like tax policy, a lot of people would say that you're conservative, Larry, in the sense that you're a professional who actually thinks about the cause and effect consequences of different modalities of regulation and tax policy, and you think about it as an economist does. And John, being a humanist, thinks about many of the questions that come up in debates about race and inequality in a manner that is similarly dispassionate, intelligent, grounded in his expertise. and not predictable, not ideologically classifiable. He's an independent thinker, as are you, as am I. So John and I, we're both African Americans. John's first book, his big book, was called Losing the Race. It was published in 2000. And I published in 2002 a book called The Anatomy of Racial Inequality. And John and I had been in conversation about the race issues in American political culture for years. And then along comes Bob Wright in this platform. And I say, this is something I'm really interested in. I've been interested in it all of my career, as you know, going all the way back to my 1976 dissertation at MIT. And I said, well, here, let me implement with John McWhorter a program of conversation, not just a single episode, but an ongoing open-ended conversation and exchange. This is in the era when Obama was on the uptake. Obama was coming into national celebrity and on the verge of winning the nomination and then getting elected president. This is 2007, 2008. So a lot of race talk is in the air. And it's before the police shootings that became famous, Trayvon Martin, which is 2012, I think, Michael Brown, which is 2015, I think, George Floyd, which is 2020. But Black Lives Matter kinds of sentiments are in the air. Anti-racism theology, I might almost call it. John's most recent big book is Woke Racism, How a New Religion is Destroying Black America, or words to that effect. So the theological quality of some of the discourse on the left on the race question impressed both of us. So we took it up, John and I, took it up as a topic of conversation. Now, it turns out you can talk about that stuff forever. There's no end. There's no end to items in the news that are keying conversations on race questions. There's no end to political argument and debate about this or that, affirmative action, diversity, equity, inclusion, reparations, crime in the cities, who's mayor of what town, what this congressman said, what about white supremacy, what's, et cetera. So we took that up, John and I, as a topic of conversation times a month for years.
Well, this was on Blogging Head, or at some point you became your own?
This is at Blogging Heads. I'm at Blogging Heads until 2019, 2020.
And then
I forget exactly when.
And then you went on your own.
Then I went on my own. Now, by the way, this is all gratis. I'm not asking anybody to contribute anything. I'm just putting up these posts at Bob Wright's platform. And I'll say this with modesty and with great respect for Bob Wright. I'm the best thing going at that platform. I'm the guy that a lot of people want to see. I'm driving a lot of traffic to the platform. People are complaining, I have to subscribe to all these other people. All I really want is Loury. And Bob recognized that and thought that I was at a point where I should probably branch out on my own. Also, a point where we should probably try to monetize. And so, to make a long story short, I migrated from the Blogging Heads platform to my own independent YouTube channel and to the Patreon platform as a way of allowing people to subscribe to my content and support my show. And this was in 2020, and we've been producing the Glenn Show independently from Bob for the last 6 years.
How financially secure do you feel? Imagine a tool to help you make smart financial decisions. A tool that factors in all your financial data and shows what you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life. That tool is Maxify. Powerful, accurate, and easy to use. Developed by Boston University economist Lawrence Kotlikoff, Maxify takes the guesswork out of financial decisions at every stage of life. Maxify calculates what you can afford to spend now and throughout retirement. And you can run what-if scenarios to see how your finances might change by taking a new job, buying a home, or downsizing. Knowing the impact before you decide lets you make smarter decisions so you can finally enjoy financial peace of mind. Are you ready? Visit Maxify.com today to start planning. That's Maxify with an I. Maxify, Maxify.com.
So Nate, but you're now on Substack as opposed to Patreon, right?
Yeah, moved from Patreon to Substack. Got a creative director. His name is Nikita Petrov. I inherited him from Bob, frankly, and he's been working with me and for me since I moved away from Bob's platform. And he basically suggested that Substack would be, because there's writing, there's not just putting up the podcast, there's also writing, would be a more flexible environment to try to do this. And there was a deal. Substack recruited me, paid a substantial advance for a bonus for signing me up as a contributor at Substack, which Patreon wasn't offering. By the way,
Right.
my son Nehemiah now is an employee of Patreon. He's a data scientist in San Francisco working in the corporate offices of
There you go. You
Patreon.
got to flip back. You got to go back to Patreon. Yeah. Well, so this thing has been a decent commercial success for you, but you've also had, just made a huge contribution to intellectual discourse and raise the level of academic and political discussion for the country. Talk a bit about some of the recent or the big hits, that have really grabbed people to the point where you're getting a zillion likes and loves, even though maybe people don't fully agree with your point of view or with John's if he's on the show. But yeah, tell us some of the podcasts that you're kind of most proud of, or that you find most interesting retrospectively.
Well, I don't know if I want to name specific podcasts. I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out. And I mean, I could talk about some of the things. So I think the thing that John and I did that's gotten the most views is interviewing filmmakers from Minneapolis who did a documentary on the killing of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin, the police officer who's in federal prison now serving a 20 plus year sentence for murder. He was convicted in a court in Minneapolis. He was a police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. George Floyd was the African-American individual who expired while being arrested under contested circumstances. And it started a movement. The killing of George Floyd was in 2020 was an epic event. And these filmmakers questioned whether or not justice was actually done. Did Derek Chauvin really murder George Floyd? Or did he die from the strenuous consequences of his resisting arrest while under the influence of drugs and in a relatively poor physical health when a police officer was doing a very difficult job? According to the book, more or less, this is their argument in this documentary film. And the consequences of the killing of George Floyd, what happened in the city of Minneapolis, the rioting and the civil disorder, and the cops' point of view about what happened after the killing of George Floyd. And a police station was burned to the ground. Cops were disillusioned and dispirited and angry, and the cops' perspective was projected in this documentary. We interviewed these filmmakers. Now, they're not without the possibility of being criticized for bias in the making of the film. And some of that came through in the first interview, that segment of the show that I did with these people. And I did a subsequent conversation with John when they weren't present, where we explored more fully the kind of devil's advocate of the other side of the story about why this film wasn't entirely objective. And the film produced a significant commentary at Twitter, now X, and other platforms where critical observers were either taking the film apart or defending the argument of the film. This was all grist for our mill because it drove traffic to our interview with the filmmakers. I even interviewed the Attorney General, he's still the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, former Congressman, Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, prosecutor in the case in which Derek Chauvin was convicted in state court for murder in the death of George Floyd, and he defended the case. I delved deeply into the forensic evidence associated with the case in order to acquaint myself with the issues and covered it at the Glenn Show. Now, a couple of things. First of all, George Floyd was a national figure and a martyr to a cause, the cause being racial justice and antagonism toward police for being overly physically brutal and to the point of killing, taking life against African Americans. That's a idea, that's a concept that's out there. You question that at your peril. We were in effect allowing people to question it and taking them seriously in doing so. And we're Black. So, this is John McWhorter and myself, but I take full responsibility as the guy in charge of the platform for the content that we put up there. But we're Black. We're Black, quote, conservatives, close quote, contrarians. A lot of people were pissed about that. A lot of people were also encouraged by it. Even Blacks can see that Derek Chauvin was railroaded, that was a show trial, that his punishment was way disproportionate, that the circumstance was hardly a, if you will, black and white scenario of, extirpating life. It was a complicated, difficult, subtle, nuanced, et cetera, et cetera. Even Black people are doing that. That is Glenn Loury and his platform. So we got, I don't know how many, maybe you're looking at the numbers there. We got like over 1 million views for the episode where I interviewed these filmmakers. Because the idea that Derek Chauvin might have been wrongly convicted and might be unjustly punished is an idea that is both anathema to tens of millions and also a welcome reprieve from woke propaganda to another tens of millions. And some fraction of those millions wanted to hear me in my interview with these filmmakers.
Okay, so you interview these guys, but where do you and John come down at as of now? You've done your homework, you've interviewed both sides, you talked to both sides. Where do you come down on was this policeman falsely imprisoned? What's your take?
I don't want to answer your question, but I'm going to.
I don't like to ask easy questions, Glenn.
Well, no, I mean, it's because in a way, that's like asking a journalist who's covering a story and who's giving you both sides of the story, what does he believe? And
so give us both sides.
His opinion is not relevant. His opinion is not conversation. In other words, I want to invite your audience, anybody who hears this, to go to Google, find the video, and look at it yourself, and you tell me what you think. Okay. That kind of thing. But I'm going to answer your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was a disaster for the country. The death of George Floyd and the aftermath of it was a disaster for the country. I don't think the Black Lives Matter, Black and white, this is an issue of racism and American police violence, it comes anywhere near to the truth. I think what happened after George Floyd's death in Minneapolis was despicable. I think the civil disorder that issued, it's got a long political tail, and that the reaction that was manifest in the rise of anti-racism rhetoric on the right is partly due to the excesses associated with that. Associated with the repercussions after his death. I think Derek Chauvin should not have had his knee on that guy's neck. I think the argument that he was simply administering an approved police technique doesnn pass the smell test. I think what I've learned from people like Radley Balko, Balko. You can find his post at Twitter on this issue without any difficulty, formerly Twitter, has the better of the argument. He was careless. He was negligent. I think a manslaughter finding would have been entirely appropriate. Police administering of force in a manner that cost a human life because of careless disregard for the life. I think murder overstates the case. I think 20 years in prison, this guy's been stabbed nearly to death as an inmate in Arizona. In effect, a life sentence. I think that's political. I think Maxine Waters, that's the California congresswoman who, amongst many others, led mobs around the courthouse. We demand justice, behaved despicably. So if Trump were to pardon Derek Chauvin, I would understand the argument for doing so, even though I think it would be a grave error politically to stir this pot again and invite the kind of reaction, the kind of vitriol, the kind of fury that a pardoning of this guy would surely engender. On the other hand, I think, let me finish.
Okay.
George Floyd was buried in a national funeral in a gold casket drawn by a caisson, preached over by leading political figures as if he were a hero. As an African American, I think that's shameful and despicable. He was not a hero. He was not a martyr. That is not the kind of symbolism that I would endorse or that I would engage in. And the reason I insisted on finishing is because this is what the Glenn Show is about. It's about giving intelligent and passionate voice to a point of view that otherwise wouldn't be heard at all, because you're all sheep walking around reciting mantras in the name of doing right, when in fact you're showing complete disrespect for my people. George Floyd is not an emblem of virtue. He's not a symbol of righteousness. He's not a historic figure.
Okay, but okay.
Etc.
This is good because we're getting a good taste for the show and what you bring to the table.
Mind you, I did not want to go there. All I wanted to do was talk about being a journalist and having these people on the show. You asked me, you drew me out, you insisted that I take a stand on the issue, so I have done so.
Want more money, less risk, and a better life? Buy Money Magic, a new book by Lawrence Kotlikoff, Boston University economist, personal finance expert, and best-selling author. Whether it's education, career, marriage, housing, investing, retirement, Social Security, IRA, or 401k decisions, Money Magic delivers scores of secrets to raise your living standard. Financial journalist Jane Bryant Quinn says Money Magic is a must-read. Nobel laureate George Akerlof says Money Magic is quite probably the best financial advice book ever written. Financial guru John Malden says, you'll love this amazing book. It's full of wit, wisdom, and startling paths to a better financial life. And columnist Scott Burns calls Money Magic a funny, brilliant read, offering wildly powerful, unconventional choices that can literally change your life. Get Lawrence Kotlikoff's Money Magic today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent booksellers.
I appreciate that. I think it's good that you did, to tell you the truth. I think it's important, but I wanted to ask you, related to this, whether, okay, your position is that there was an overreaction which led to yet another overreaction, and that the whole thing went downhill for blacks, for whites, for the country. And the question is whether the fact that this became such that people could not look at this impassionately or objectively, and they turned him into, somebody should be buried in a gold casket, and that also somebody should be stabbed in prison. What does this tell you about the nature of this melting pot that we're supposed to have not melting? About the more fundamental question of, can we get along? The Rodney King question or appeal.
Yeah.
Let us all get along. It seems like this country has a forever problem with race, and it doesn't, but your position on that is no, that things have been getting better, that we do have some progress, that we should focus on the progress. Talk to that a little bit.
Well, I think it says that the conditions for healthy relations between various factions in the country's politics on these questions are fragile. Those conditions are not to be taken for granted. Things can get out of hand and the consequences can be very deleterious. And that's true, even though there has been great progress. The country is changing. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are now anathema to what looks like a working majority of the political governing class of the country. The Supreme Court just overturned the constitutionality of racial preferences in college admissions after the first case, important case, is Bakke. No, it's DeFunis. It's a law school case in, I think, 1974. So that's now 50 years plus, in which the legality of preferential admissions policies designed to ensure racial diversity in the most selective and elite venues have been practiced. And the Supreme Court struck it down. It was a divided 6-3 opinion, but it was unequivocal. Justice Roberts, Justice Thomas's supporting opinion, Justice Gorsuch, I think it is, these important opinions are now the law of the land, and they have stricken racial preferential affirmative action as a legitimate practice in the country. The attack, and I don't think you can call it anything but that, on diversity administrative programming, not just in universities, but also in the private sector, that has accompanied Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election of 2024 is well underway. The universities are being challenged because they are trying to affect, even without racially preferential policies, an environment, trying to create an environment, a benign and welcoming environment for the students of color. And we're being told that that is a disqualifying practice of the university administrative level if it wants to maintain federal support. So anyway, I ramble. I'm saying I think the wheel is turning on the question of racial justice in a way that is negative from the point of view of those of us who think that the work of the civil rights movement, while advanced and certainly productive, remains incomplete.
When you say, so you're saying that this decision to have basically racial blind admissions was not, you don't approve of it? You're saying it's pushing us. I thought your position,
No,
this is actually this is a good thing.
no. All right. I have been a critic of affirmative action for many years, and I agreed with the legal reasoning of the Supreme Court's decision. I'm just saying the straw is in the wind politically, and that is an indication of the extent to which a receptive attitude toward African-American claims cannot be taken for granted. No, we've had this conversation before, but I guess we should review it again briefly. My critique of affirmative action is not that it's constitutionally prohibited. It's that it is a poor policy response to the underlying problem. It's a distraction from the underlying problem. The underlying problem is the disparity in the development of academic, this is for higher education, where I speak now about affirmative action, of academic proficiency among the populations that are being benefited by affirmative action. The test score disparity is not an indication of bias. It's an indication of a disparity in not bias at the point of admission. It's an indication of disparity in the development of the skills which are being rewarded by admission.
But yet,
and
okay,
affirmative action is not an answer to that problem.
Okay. I hear you and don't necessarily disagree that we got a problem and policy A may not be the right answer, and we've now outlawed policy A.
I mean, there's more to it. There's also the unfairness to the Asians. There's also the fact that this can't be a permanent way of administering the institutions whose admission into which is highly sought after. This is got to be, there has to be some kind of time limit on the practice of this kind of thing. Otherwise, you cultivate a racially grounded disparity in the citizenship status among effective
Okay,
citizenship, et cetera.
but okay, we got a problem. We got a long problem, centuries long, and it's still there. We've got policy A, affirmative action. You think it's done more bad than good. Other people differ, but anyway, it's no longer permitted. But you're also saying that there are other policies, early education, perhaps, intervention
Sure.
in poor neighborhoods, maybe colorblind, that can rectify the inequality.
Well,
But
not quite.
on the other hand, you've got papers on record that you wrote at Boston University that clearly say that racial stigma can be perpetual, and can be reinforced by decisions that people make endogenously in response to the existing prejudices, and that those decisions can then reinforce those prejudices. So you're saying in your academic work, and I know this is what makes you a true intellectual, which is that you can look at a paper you wrote and not swear by it. And you could even say, that's important paper, but it's not necessarily what I would use to guide policy. It's not important enough relative to these other factors to determine policy's direction. But you do have these papers that it's worth pointing out to the audience here that do really say that racial stigma can be perpetual, and that the idea that try and get people to, without, let's say, subsidizing the people that are subject to the racial stigma in terms of their education, without putting additional extra resources to change the distribution of outcomes, so that we change the distribution of perceptions, so we change the distribution of perceptions about hiring and perceptions about investing in yourself, then unless we have some inequality in investment that's racially based, we're not going to get out from under. Respond to that, please.
Well, I think I'm a complicated person with more than one dimension to my intellectual life.
Right.
I think my book, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality, where I introduced my concept of racial stigma along with racial stereotypes, and build an argument for a structural account of rational people of more or less goodwill, perpetuating through their interactions with one another a historically inherited system of disparity along racial lines. I stand by that. I think it does have some implications for policy, mainly along the dimension of developing the talent that would otherwise go unexpressed due to the kinds of social interactions and stigma that you aptly summarize and that I analyze in depth in some of my work, some of which was done when I was at Boston University. I think the link between that and policy, especially preferential admissions policy, is completely is not straightforward. I think to the extent that I want to advocate for preference of any kind, it would be at the point of the development of the human potential of people early in life, as opposed to the rewarding of the opportunities associated with expressing that potential later in life. Okay,
so you're PI at kindergarten level.
I'm not finished yet. That trivializes what I'm saying, but okay. I'm not going to argue with it, but I'm not done. Everything is not fixable by policy.
Okay.
Some things have to do with the way in which people orient themselves to conducting themselves in the world. Life is not fair. History can't be repealed by fiat. African Americans, as other groups, have to deal with the hand that history has dealt us and an invitation to passivity and a delegation of the responsibility for our own fate to the system has to be resisted. Some of my animus has to do with the fact that, and I follow the work of the great Thomas Sowell in saying this, when you look through history and across continents at ethnically diverse societies, you don't see equality between groups. You never see it. What you see is a variegated landscape of social disparity that is cultivated by historical processes, by culture and norms, and by human behavior that breaks down differently in different populations. Some of it has to do with the agency of the people in those populations, whether they be Chinese expatriates in Southeast Asia, Lebanese traders, South Asian migrants on the east coast of Africa, Jews throughout the history of Europe and the West. Groups are different from one another. The idea that the goal of policy should be a equality of standing between groups is self-refuting, because if the groups are to be taken seriously as distinct population subaggregates, they will, in the nature of the case, possess practices, patterns, habits, norms, customs, and values that differentiate them from one another. Which customs, habits, practices, norms, and values are relevant to the development of human potential? So I think there's a higher level meta argument that has to be brought to bear when you invoke my stigma-grounded sociological hysteresis causation arguments about policy. Policy doesn't follow straight from causality. You have to.
You're saying the policy.
You have to take into account agency. The African American situation invites passivity in a way that I steadfastly wish to resist.
Question: how financially secure do you feel? Do you have enough money to retire? How much is enough? And if you don't have enough, how can you possibly find that money before you retire? Tough questions. One smart answer: Maxify. Maxify is the powerful online planning tool that takes the guesswork out of retirement. Maxify compares your assets against your fixed expenses to calculate how much you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life. And it shows you safe ways to find more money. Developed by Boston University economist Lawrence Kotlikoff, Maxify makes a complicated problem like retirement planning simple. Maxify. Powerful, accurate, easy to use. Want some peace of mind? Make the smart choice. Maxify. Visit Maxify.com today to start planning. That's Maxify with an I. Maxify. Maxify.com.
Okay, I think this is a huge. I'm glad we talked about this. I mean, we've strayed away from the Glenn show per se, which I think is interesting, but this is more important for sure. We've talked about this a lot, and if I could summarize what you just said, is that like other groups, African Americans, Blacks, whatever designation we want to, people of color are going to need to take care of themselves. Basically, they can't really sit back and count on some policy, some norms of justice, enough people concerned for their welfare to really make a difference, and that we have enough history of this so that even if we might understand at a deep level why racism persists and why inequality persists, that the answer is not external, the answer is internal. The answer is picking yourself up by your bootstraps and not waiting for somebody else to educate your kids, but educating your kids yourself. Is that a fair?
I wouldn't put it quite that way, but yeah, you're in the right ballpark with that. I mean, bootstraps, well, what if you don't have boots and, solve the problems yourself? Well, not every problem is going to be solvable. There are preconditions in terms of basic structure. If you have a police department that is run by racists and that is using lethal force indiscriminately,
Yeah.
if you have a private sector that is discriminating in employment based on racial things, et cetera, you want equal citizenship. That's the responsibility of the public sector to both define, implement, enforce, and punish when it's violated and stuff like that. I'm not saying there was no there to the civil rights movement in 1950 or 1970, but I'm saying we're in the year 2026 and counting. The country is way different now than it was 50 years ago. There are considerably more Hispanics than there are Blacks in the American population. The weariness of the political culture with the same old African American laments is evident. And it's not just Donald Trump. It'll be there when Donald Trump is gone. And nobody's coming to save us.
I think that's the key thing.
There's no cosmic justice. There's no court on high that will parse history and mete out theoretical justice on the scale of a continental nation. So we don't have any choice but to take care of ourselves to the extent that we're capable, and to foster in our children an attitude of independence and agency that doesn't have them looking to sympathetic white liberals as their savior.
Nobody's coming to save us is an important phrase here. Let's move away from Black versus white.
Okay.
What do you think about our country? Is anybody nobody's coming to save our country either. And here we have evidence right in front of us of our country turning into a fascist state with people getting shot in broad daylight just because they're exercising their First Amendment rights. How do you see, respond a little bit as we close here to how you see kind of the current political and climate and the direction of our polity of our leadership here, because it strikes me that everybody is very afraid. People with my mentality, at least, and I think yours is very concerned that we're heading into some very dark place that we haven't been since the nation's founding, and that our elections are being threatened, and that our civil liberties are being threatened, and that we're being kind of dominated by a subset of people that are out for themselves.
Well, I don't agree with everything you just said, or repeat it that way, but I do agree that we're in trouble. You say we haven't faced this since the founding. I think we have. I think it was called 1855 to 1865. We faced it. We faced it. We faced the dispute about enforcing the fugitive slave laws. This is before the Civil War. This is a person, a human being, who is born free in the eyes of God, but who is held as property by a civil arrangement, escaping the jurisdiction in which that civil arrangement is lawful,
right,
and entering into, within the same nation, another generation, another jurisdiction where that civil arrangement is held in absolute contempt. The South Carolina agricultural worker somehow gets in the Underground Railroad, sneaks across state lines, and ends up in Massachusetts.
Dred Scott.
Along comes, or Missouri, along comes a bounty hunter who's going to kidnap this person in Massachusetts and return them to their rightful owner. Not everybody in Massachusetts is on board with that. Some people want to resist. Some people want to resist violently if necessary because they feel that they are on the righteous side of history when they do so. The federal government and the state governments come into conflict with one another over these issues. That conflict leads to John Brown-like vigilantism on the one hand, Fort Sumter-like conflict between federal and state authorities on the other hand, ultimately a bloody, vicious, terrible conflict between the states, which ends under Lincoln's management with the elimination of slavery and the reframing of the constitution of the country, together with a long historical process that is required to restore the country to its more or less unified framing, and begins a sojourn that goes on for more than a century of the descendants of those slaves being incorporated fully into the body politic. So we have faced such a question before. The issues are similar. This is my opinion. You asked for it. The country has a border. Some people have crossed that border without the country's authorization. Shall they be permitted to stay here notwithstanding that? Some people say yes, some people say no. The guys who are running the government now, men and women, elected by the people in a duly constituted election, say no. A lot of people, they're in a position of you could put it by analogy, of the slave endorsing majority of the country in 1860. They say no, they can't stay, they have to leave. We are the law. This is lawful. We're asking them, and not if they don't accept the invitation, telling them get out. Other people are saying those are our neighbors. They're like the Massachusetts residents who don't like the bounty hunter coming to return the slave to the South Carolina plantation. They're defying federal authority on behalf of a higher authority, which is the righteousness as they understand it of their cause. No, I'm not making excuse for ICE thuggery here. Let me stipulate I'm against thuggery by ICE or anybody else. I'm talking about what the real issue is. The real issue is a conflict within the body politic about the administration of federal law concerning the border. That's the real issue. Now, if we don't get a way of scaling down the rhetoric, and I'm not optimistic about this, and tempering the application of federal law so that it doesn't wrench people out of their babies out of their parents' arms, and it doesn't result in mass thugs gunning people down, but it also doesn't result in John Brown, Harper's Ferry. It's not good either.
Right.
If we don't find a way out, we're going to end up in a similar situation in the 21st century that we endured in the 19th century, and that's a disaster for this country. But the answer can't be, can it? Don't enforce the border. The answer has got to be some reckoning with the imperatives of having a boundary on the country that can't just be willfully flouted.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100% with you, Glenn, on this. And yeah, God willing, we'll get there. And let's pray for the country because we are in trouble.
I'm for that, and we don't have the
You're
wisest leadership.
praying, man. I'm
going to grant
Yeah,
I'm going to grant you the point. I'm not a Trump the Ranger syndrome guy like you, but I'm adjacent. We don't have the best leadership. It's a very serious situation, and we don't have the best leadership.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is I wish you were running for president, and you're almost old enough to do so. So here we go.
Okay, Larry, I want to use this episode, if you don't mind, at the Glenn Show. Do you mind?
Oh, absolutely. Love to have it on the Glenn Show. I think it's a great episode. We got to talk about all kinds of things. You're a very special friend and a very special gift to the country. And we just need you doing another 1,000 podcasts and bring people together with
I'm on it, Larry. I'm 77. I still got a year or two left ahead of me. I'm emeritus now, not doing economics for a living anymore, but doing podcasting with zeal. So I'm going to keep at it, and we'll see what happens. But I appreciate your support and your admiration. Frankly, it means a lot to me.
Yeah. Great to have you, Glenn. Thanks so much.